just after I turned 17. I was forced out of my home when my father chose to make room for my older half-brother, William, who had decided to move back in. As the favored son from my father's first relationship, William was reluctant to embrace independence and preferred the comfort of our father's house. His attachment likely stemmed from his limited childhood connection with Dad, as his parents' brief relationship ended shortly after his birth. Though he was technically supposed to visit only a few times per month, William seemed to frequent our home far more than expected. To me, it felt like he was always there, a perception probably intensified by my unwillingness to spend time with him. Despite the shared custody arrangement with his mother, William was clearly closer to Dad, leading to frequent forced interactions that I dreaded. My relationship with my father had been strained since childhood, worsening after we lost my mother to lung cancer a few years ago. His cold, dismissive behavior towards me starkly contrasted with the warmth he showed William. It became painfully clear that I was not the son he wanted, especially following my mother's passing. My father would reprimand me for the smallest infractions, exhibiting an indifference that felt especially cruel given the affection he lavished on William. William embraced his role as the golden child and often bullied me, exploiting his favored status to torment me without fear of consequences. Whenever I brought up his behavior, I was met with dismissive responses that reinforced the toxic "boys will be boys" mentality, pushing me to silently endure the bullying. As he grew older, his methods of torment shifted from physical altercations to psychological warfare, using his friends to belittle me at school. This social bullying was particularly devastating during my transition to middle school, where social standing was crucial. William and his friends labeled me a D-rag, tarnishing my reputation and isolating me from my peers, even those I had known since elementary school. Now, 10 months after being kicked out, my father and William have come to me with a desperate plea. They want me to lie for them to cover up a crime William committed, a threat to their freedom. This request, after all the years of neglect and hostility, feels like the ultimate betrayal and manipulation. Growing up, I always felt overshadowed by William, who seemed to excel at everything. He was athletic, academically gifted, and the clear favorite of our father. My high school years were particularly tough. I struggled to find my place until William left for college, which provided a brief respite, though I still found myself with only a few friends and frequently targeted by bullies. At home, things were no better. Both William and my father often belittled me, chipping away at my self-esteem. Despite my good grades and talent in science, my father's charismatic demeanor allowed him to sway my mother's perceptions, convincing her that their harsh words were merely playful teasing. Although my mother was kind-hearted and did her best to defend me, her efforts fell flat against their relentless ridicule. When William finally went off to college, I hoped for relief from the negativity at home, but that hope was short-lived. Soon after, my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer, a devastating blow that fractured the already shaky foundation of our family. Instead of uniting us, this crisis further strained our bonds. My father withdrew, not only from me but from my mother as well, retreating into a shell of indifference while I was left to manage household responsibilities and support my ailing mother. After my mother's passing, the environment at home became even more unbearable. My father sank into a deep, uncommunicative state, barely acknowledging my existence. I did my best to maintain the household and sought support from my grandparents, fearing my father was battling depression. However, my concerns were dismissed, leaving me to cope alone. During this time, William's visits from college offered a brief escape from the hostility. Though he was far from warm, his behavior was at least civil, a small mercy for which I was grateful. Despite these challenges, I tried to keep peace within the family, knowing that any confrontation would only provoke more criticism from my father. I clung to the hope that someday things might improve. This experience taught me resilience and the importance of seeking support whenever possible, even amid ongoing adversity. After my mother's funeral, the dynamics at home took a harsh turn. My father, who had been distant and unresponsive for months, reverted to his old habits, binge drinking and resuming his derogatory treatment toward me. He would bark orders for me to handle all the household chores, tasks that my mother had managed even during her illness. With her gone, all responsibilities fell squarely on my shoulders. Balancing schoolwork and household duties was exhausting. Any attempt to protest was met with reminders from my father that I wasn't contributing financially, so doing chores was the least I could do to earn my keep. It was a demeaning situation, but with no alternatives, I felt forced to endure it. The only glimmer of hope I clung to was the prospect of attending college, which represented an escape from the oppressive atmosphere of what had become a house devoid of warmth after my mother's passing. Living with my maternal grandparents could have been an option, but they lived far away, and I had a year of high school left to finish. That all changed a few months ago when my father, anticipating the return of William, his favored son, from college, decided to kick me out to make room for him. Although William had moved away to build a life with his wife and child, my father was eager to welcome him back, even at my expense. He informed me, with barely 4 weeks' notice, that I needed to find a new place to live. William and his wife would take the guest room, while my room was to be converted into a nursery for their child. This arrangement felt not just unfair, but like a blatant dismissal of my place in the family. When I tried to argue with my father, it was futile. His mind was made up. He gave me a 4-week ultimatum to vacate my room. Left with no options, I reluctantly moved in with my grandparents, leaving behind the house that had long ceased to feel like home. Things took a turn when the police began investigating my father's actions. Although I was initially unaware of any legal avenues available to challenge his decisions, the urgency of the situation and my mistrust of my father, who had shown he could evict me without a second thought, plunged me into panic. In a rush, I started looking for a new place to live, finally deciding to move in with my grandparents. I had hesitated before because they lived quite far away, and I was still in high school. However, with only a few weeks left until graduation, I felt I had no other viable options. Within days, I moved out, eager to leave before William returned home with his family. My father showed no emotion as I left. He didn't even say goodbye. As I departed with the movers, my grandparents drove a long distance to pick me up. They were ready to confront my father, but I discouraged them, wanting to avoid any further drama. 10 months later, I had settled comfortably with my grandparents and hadn't spoken to my father since that day. I had no plans to reconnect with him or William. I was preparing to start college in a few weeks, which was already arranged, leaving me with no reason to reach out to them. Then, unexpectedly, they contacted me because they needed my help. A few days ago, they visited, and despite my surprise, I agreed to hear them out, sensing their desperation. I learned that William had returned home after losing his job and was struggling financially, which prompted him and his wife to move back in with my father. They had hoped to find new employment quickly, but the job market was tight, and William's skills were far from unique, making it difficult for him to stand out. Eventually, my father managed to secure a job for William at his company, although it paid less than his previous position. However, it turned out that William had been embezzling funds from the company for several months, and when this was discovered, both he and my father were implicated in the scheme. Their employer, a family business led by a close friend of my late mother, had not yet filed a lawsuit out of respect for her memory, but patience was wearing thin. My father and William proposed a desperate plan. They wanted me to claim that they had stolen the money from my college fund, hoping this would garner sympathy and buy them time to return the stolen funds. This would stave off their immediate firing and potential imprisonment. Despite their audacity in making such a request after years of mistreatment, I refused outright. Their plan was absurd, and I was unwilling to participate in their deception. When I expressed my refusal to help, both my father and William became agitated, insisting that I had to come through for them, despite the dire circumstances they were in. With the real possibility of jail looming over them, they seemed to think I was being stubborn out of old grudges. I corrected them. This wasn't about resentment. My father had kicked me out not long ago. It was hardly a distant memory. More importantly, my resistance wasn't personal. It was rooted in integrity. Their plan was fundamentally dishonest. I knew their employer well. He was a close friend of my late mother, almost like an uncle to me. We had maintained a good relationship, and it was my mother who had recommended my father for the job when he was struggling. Now, not only had William made choices that jeopardized the company, but my father was trying to cover it up by using me as a scapegoat. I found that morally unacceptable and refused to be part of their deception. I advised them it would be better to repay what they had stolen instead of spinning a web of lies that could entangle them further. They were fortunate to even have the opportunity to make things right without facing immediate legal consequences. If they continued down this path, they risked a lawsuit they would surely lose, and jail time was a distinct possibility. When I tried to explain the gravity of the situation and the simplicity of just paying back the money, they didn't take it well. My father grew particularly upset, rejecting my counsel and demanding my complicity instead. As I held my ground, the emotional intensity escalated. To my surprise, my father began to cry. It was an unusual sight. I had never witnessed his vulnerability before. He expressed disappointment, emphasizing that he had hoped for my support as his son, believing that familial bonds would transcend past conflicts. William echoed his sentiments, pleading for my help because of my favorable standing among my mother's friends. They viewed me as their last hope, the bridge to a less severe outcome than what awaited them. Despite the emotional pressure, I remained resolute. I reiterated my suggestion to come clean and return the stolen funds. Their reaction was one of frustration. They accused me of turning against them because of past grievances, failing to grasp that my decision was based on moral grounds, not revenge. The confrontation was challenging, but it was essential for me to stand by my principles. I encouraged them once more to take the honest route and resolve the matter transparently. Although they found it hard to accept, the conversation ended without resolution, leaving them to ponder the path of integrity I proposed. From a young age, my relationship with my father and William had been strained, and they seemed disappointed with how I was handling the current situation. After our last conversation, they left, but I was left feeling deeply conflicted. The thought of them potentially facing jail time weighed heavily on my mind, stirring feelings of guilt. Even though I was determined not to engage in anything illegal or unethical, the dilemma felt especially painful because participating in their plan would feel like a betrayal of my late mother's memory. Manipulating her friend, an idea that felt entirely wrong, was something I couldn't fathom. Time was pressing. My father and William didn't have an indefinite period to settle their debts, intensifying the urgency of my decision. After much reflection, I resolved to maintain my distance from their illegal activities. It was a clear choice, driven by my need to uphold my moral and ethical standards. Engaging in such dishonesty was not only illegal but an affront to everything I believed in. They had an opportunity to make things right on their own by repaying the stolen money without further deceit. This path allowed them to preserve their reputations without involving me in a falsehood. Many people advised me to steer clear, not just because of the nature of William and my father's actions, but also because getting involved would haunt my conscience in ways it wouldn't affect them. Our fundamental differences in character and values reinforced my decision to stay out of it. If they tried to reach out again, I was prepared to block them. I had already taken steps to block them on all known contacts, but I anticipated they might attempt to reach me using different numbers or social media profiles. My grandparents supported my decision, reminding me that this mess was of their own making and it was their responsibility to clean it up. Expecting me to help after years of mistreatment was unreasonable. 5 days after their last visit, my father attempted to contact me again. True to my expectations, he used a different phone number. I answered the call without realizing it was him, but as soon as I recognized his voice, I hung up immediately. His attempt to reach out confirmed my resolve to keep my distance, ensuring that I would not be drawn back into their turmoil. When I heard my father's voice on the call, I didn't react quickly enough to block him, allowing him to send me a text. In his message, he acknowledged that he knew I wanted to avoid further discussions but insisted they were in dire straits. He explained that their employer was pressuring them daily to return the stolen money and threatening legal action if they failed. His plea filled me with guilt, yet I responded firmly, stating that I wouldn't assist him and urging him to find another solution to his problem. After sending that message, I blocked his number, hoping he would understand my stance, though I was uncertain if he truly would. My greatest hope was that he'd act responsibly to avoid worsening his situation. Since then, I hadn't heard from my father, but my grandparents reached out to my mother's friend, the CEO, for insight into the next steps. We had hesitated to bother him earlier due to his busy schedule, and direct communication with my father or William was no longer an option. Thankfully, my grandfather managed to speak with him. The CEO expressed his intention to proceed with a lawsuit if the money wasn't returned soon. However, he also mentioned his willingness to forgive, influenced by his long-standing friendship with my mother. Although he couldn't simply write off the debt, he acknowledged the awkward position this put me in and apologized, which I appreciated. I reassured him that it was all right. I no longer lived with my father, and I believed that some consequences were deserved. The situation remained uncertain, but there seemed to be a consensus that my father understood the severity of his predicament and would attempt to settle his debts to avoid legal repercussions. During this stressful time, I had a meaningful conversation with the CEO. He reminded me of the offer he made years ago through my mother. Should I ever need a marketing internship or a job, his doors would be open to me. This offer provided some comfort, affirming that, despite her absence, my mother's influence continued to look out for my well-being. It was a small solace amidst the turmoil, reinforcing the ongoing support network I had thanks to my mother's enduring legacy.